Welcome to the Evangelism Podcast. I'm Daniel King, and I'm excited about telling people about Jesus. Today, I have a very special guest with me, Doug Lucas. Thank you so much for joining me on the Evangelism Podcast.
It's an honor to be here, Daniel. Thanks.
Brother Doug, for many years, I've been receiving emails in my inbox
I'm so
from
sorry.
you,
Please
from
forgive me.
Brigada,
Yeah.
and these emails are full of very important resources for missionaries, for people involved in missions, for people who have a passion for the Great Commission. Tell me a little bit about Brigada and what the focus of these emails are.
Sure. I was serving as a worker in what we would now call the former Soviet Union back in 1991, and I would see these refugees that would come in from Central Asia building homes in the place to which they were returning. And when they did so, they would work as a team, as a unit, and they would even pass the buckets of concrete or whatever for the foundations in a kind of a brigade form. And in the language that they were using, the word was Brigada, and it stuck with me that they were doing a kind of a bucket brigade that all worked together toward this common cause. And when I came back shortly afterward, I was asked to lead the run up to a big missions convention that was trying to create a lot of momentum toward finishing the task of world evangelization. And it led me to kind of think about doing that together across churches, across streams, across orgs. And so I proposed, well, why don't we start this conversation between each other, maybe just a weekly, some kind of weekly thing that could bring us together. And we got really good reinforcement from a ton of other people in several circles, and started up in 1995 with that idea, and it's been weekly ever since, Daniel. And that's where we got the name Brigada.
So if someone is a missionary or passionate about world evangelism, who wants to be involved in the Great Commission, why should they go and sign up to receive emails from you? What are some of the benefits that they would receive?
Brigada, of course, is spelled Brigada, kind of rhymes with the word regatta, like a race on a river. Brigada, it's an eclectic collection of resources for people that are both goers and also senders, for people who are active in cross-cultural work overseas, as well as those who are advocating and praying for the Great Commission to be accomplished in sending countries. And so I think that they could end up liking it, because out of every week's version, hopefully they'll take away at least one new resource or conference or some kind of app or idea or trend, maybe some new piece of information that they can get. And it's a free resource. At the end of each year, we ask folks if they want to participate by pitching in on the expenses, and we raise just exactly the expenses we need, and we don't take any extra money. If people gave money, I suppose we'd either return it or put it toward the next year, but that's never happened beyond the minimal expenses that are needed just to run it. And it's always been a lot of fun. It's been going weekly since January '95. People have told me before that it might be the longest weekly e-zine on the internet of any kind. I don't know if that's true, but some people told me that.
Well, I'm really impressed with all the work that you put into this and how much you've helped so many different people that are involved in the Great Commission. I really like what you say, that these are hacks for the Great Commission. And so let's talk about like some of the different hacks that you've put out in the last year or so. What are some of the different features and articles that would really help missionaries more recently?
Some of the ways that Brigada is sort of different than maybe another typical e-zine is that one of the things we do is we throw out a sample of something that we found that works, and then we say, have you found something better in this particular genre? So we might throw out an example of, say, a website that short-term teams can use as a way to build their momentum before they go. And, have you found something better? Well, the next Brigada user might comment, yeah, but this one lets them raise funds, and the funding goes through the website, and they only charge 2% for the funding. And then the next guy gets on and says, this one lets them raise funds, and it's 1.5%. Plus, they also do newsletters. The people are sitting, and so what you get is this kind of aggregated set of knowledge about particular genre. And we've done things about, for example, travel agents and travel services. We've done uh, trip cancellation insurance policies, which ones are the best. We've done what are the best ways to start new churches and multiply groups and multiply disciples. And where's the best place to learn about that? And what's the best book about it that you could read? Uh, what's an agency that helps you raise support and trains you how to raise support as a missionary? Well, what's an agency that trains the people that train people to raise support? All the apps and the services for not only the kind of retail goers, but also kind of the wholesale senders that operate at the sender level. We have a lot of folks who are very popular in the Missio Nexus world and the world of finishing a task and the world of Bible translation, and a lot of folks that are kind of out of the old days of what we used to call the Association of Church Missions Committees. So we have a lot of local churches involved and a lot of international people. At one time, I think a guy did a survey about 10 or 15 years ago and found that half of Brigada's readership are international workers in places like Europe and Africa and Asia, Australia, New Zealand, all around the world. So it's a lot of fun, and it's kind of a global stream that says, let's get this done.
Well, if you're listening and you have a heart for missions, I'd encourage you to go to brigada.org and sign up for today. And you can also look at past archives of recommendations for various services that are really beneficial that missionaries need to know about. It's very important to know best practices and which websites and which apps are the best ones to work with. And there's no time for one person to keep up with everything,
Right.
but through Brigada, you can have recommendations from a wide variety of people who are out there in the field working. And so that's
it.
BRIGADA, brigada.org. Now, Mr. Doug, you are very involved yourself in the Great Commission and leading people to Jesus through your ministry, Team Expansion, which can be found at teamexpansion.org. Could you tell us some about the overall vision and mission of what you're doing? Brigada is just one part of that, but talk to me about what you've been doing around the world for so long.
Thanks, Daniel. Brigada is kind of like crowdsourcing missions, information, and trends and resources, but that's not how I'm paid. My day job is actually to work at Team Expansion, where I serve as a president. We have about 400 full-timers in 50 countries. And what we all do is try to make and multiply disciples and churches among unreached people. So when I try to write Brigada, I'm writing as a practitioner myself rather than as some marketing person that's trying to start some website that I can someday develop into a full-time gig. I have no, designs at all to try to do websites full-time. It's kind of moonlighting on the side to try to share kind of one beggar telling another beggar where to find bread. Team Expansion is a mission organization in its own right that started in 1978 in a little prayer meeting in a dorm room, and we all signed our names by different countries on the map, and the rest is history. I started out in the lawyer's office from day one as the president, and I've somehow gotten stuck with the job ever since. And I'm always willing to hand it off to anybody else that wants it, but nobody else has wanted it yet. And we keep growing and we keep learning. Most of our workers are involved in simple practices that reproduce. We don't have large for the most part, large institutions and big properties were just simple reproducing disciple making movement strategies in unreached areas. So mostly among Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, atheists, animists. Those are the places where we work. We're based in Louisville, Kentucky. Have a little 61-acre campus here where we spend time praying and do retreats and training people to be able to go into missions. What we do.
You have a tremendous focus on reaching unreached people groups and reaching every tribe, nation, people with the gospel. What are some of the things that you're finding are most effective at reaching into sometimes very difficult areas to talk to people about Jesus?
You know, Daniel, the thing that's helped us the most is just simply embracing the tools, the practices, the strategies of disciple making movement strategies. So DMM. And you could sum those up into maybe a handful of practices, a lot of prayer for the lost, focusing on helping people obey rather than simply trying to transfer academic content, um, trying to share a lot about my story or God's story. In other words, abundant evangelism, just everywhere, and just always involved in sharing that story. Training other people to do the same. That's a big emphasis in disciple making movement strategy. And then gathering people into groups, small groups that would utilize discovery Bible study type uh, approaches, 3/3 groups, some people call them. So focusing on simple reproducible groups as a means of being the motor for church growth. And then I guess multiplying those groups and focusing on multiplication instead of just me always thinking that I have to be the one that adds, making sure that I'm trying to train this new believer so that she or he can multiply as well, and trying to do that out to many generations. And then focusing on growth among all those people. So it's not uh, a mile wide and an inch deep, but instead everybody's growing deep roots and reading a lot of scripture and applying it. So that's kind of what we're focused on. That would be the simple practices we would recommend.
Now, on your website, it talks about statistics on unreached people groups.
Mhm.
And it says there's 7.84 billion people in the world today. I think now, maybe a few days ago, I heard we've gone over 8 billion people.
Right.
And it says that there's 17,409 known people groups, and 7,402 of those groups are considered unreached. Kind of explain the criteria for why one group would be considered reached and another group might be unreached.
Yeah, it's a great question. We have largely followed the kind of the industry norm of saying that an unreached people group would be a significantly large grouping of individuals who perceive themselves to have an affinity. They are perhaps linked by an ethnic or a language likeness with each other. And it's like the largest number of individuals through which the gospel could flow before it encounters a barrier of understanding or acceptance. So, what that means is you could use basically one simple strategy and it could flow as fast and as hard and as long as it could go. But when it hits that wall of the next language group, then it might take a different startup in that next language group. Well, that would be defined as an unreached people group. And if you use that definition, that's where we get those numbers that you mentioned, probably 7,000 or so. It's hard to be exact, but around 7,000 groups that still don't have a viable chance to know about Jesus. And the typical statistics that you'll hear used are somewhere between 2% or 5% or less of that group would would claim to be an evangelical Christian of any kind. So they're basically by self definition, are they claiming to be a follower of Christ and active in doing that? Well, if that statistic is 2% or less, and if the place where they live doesn't have some kind of a nominal Christian followership anyway, like a giant, you know, kind of cloud of Catholicism or some kind of adherence of Christianity, then that people group probably has essentially zero chance to hear about Jesus, you might as well say. And those are the groups through whom we focus. Now, in this day and age, talking about literally right now in these years, we're kind of adding in the idea of focusing on unreached places as well. So it's going to be unreached people and places as we go forward. That's kind of the direction in the future. And the places would be simply, districts or states or villages that don't have a church. So people couldn't hear about Jesus there either.
And why do you feel that it's important for the church to pray for unreached people groups and then to start to engage them? A lot of people, when they first start getting interested in missions, they might go on a short-term trip to Mexico, and of course there's lots of churches in Mexico. But why should the church care about these unreached people groups, and why should we put resources towards that area of outreach?
It is a great question, Daniel. I'm glad you asked. First, because of course we want the church to grow into all those peoples and places, because it's the vision that uh, John records in Revelation 7. You know, it's the promise of the end of the ages. In fact, was it Matthew 24:14 or so? We're told that the gospel will, be spoken and preached to every person, and then the end will come, um, the every nation, and then the end will come. Well, the expectation is that God is sort of leaning against the guardrail of heaven, waiting for something to happen, and He's waiting for apparently every single nation to have had a chance to hear. And then Revelation 7, the vision will happen. All peoples, all nations, all tribes will be gathered, and there'll be representatives from every nation and tribe standing before his throne in a white robe. There's no way we can have that vision accomplished until we go to all those places. Then a secondary vision is, we know that when the gospel does travel there, people can have peace and they can be happier. And in general, life picks up. They have a hope, and that's important. But then a third reason we do it is because Jesus said to. I mean, it's just a simple command. In Matthew 28, for example, 19 and 20, Daniel, Jesus said, make disciples of all nations. And that word for nation is not the word that we would have expected it to be in English if we were to use the word nation today. We think of a political nation, but the root word back then, it was a word that's more likely would have been translated ethnic group. In fact, they didn't even have political nations like we have today back in Jesus's time. So these would be tribes or castes or kindreds. And if Jesus said, make disciples of every ethnic group, teach them to obey what I've told them to do in every ethnic group, I just figure we ought to be about it. We ought to be doing it.
Amen. Well, if you want to learn more about reaching unreached people groups, I encourage you to go to teamexpansion.org, find out more about Doug Lucas and about reaching unreached people groups. And if you want to support reaching unreached people groups, I encourage you to go and support their ministry. Mr. Doug, thank you so much for being on the Evangelism Podcast. I appreciate it.
It's an honor, Daniel. Thank you for doing it, and wish you best in all of the stuff that you produce. Thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you.
Daniel King is on a mission to save 1 million souls a year, but he can't do it alone. Would you consider sowing a financial seed today? To give, please visit www.kingministries.com.